The most consistent theme I have heard in all my interviews of kids who have attended public schools in other countries and in the US is that school here is much easier. And it comes up in so many different ways, right? But when I surveyed hundreds of exchange students from other countries who have lived and gone to school in the US, 9 out of 10 said their US classes were easier. And when I surveyed American kids who have lived abroad, 7 out of 10 of them agreed that their US classes were easier. And so what does this mean? I mean, does it mean they're worse? Not necessarily. But since we also have data showing that our kids by age 15 are performing below average in math for the developed world, at every socioeconomic level, we are not competing with our peers at that level, then you start to think, well, maybe there's something to this. And maybe we are assuming our kids are more fragile than they are. You know, our kids rank #1 in the world for the percentage at age 15 who say they routinely get high grades in math. But then below average, same kids, below average on a test of critical thinking in math. So we're really not being honest with kids at an early enough age so that they can improve and understand how much more there is and how much better they could do. American school leaders, I think, deal with so much noise, as do parents and kids and teachers. I mean, there's just so much noise about what should be happening or what isn't happening, or all the different things that schools do in the US. They do way more things than schools in other countries have to do, be it sports or extracurriculars or whatever. So it seems to me that to compensate for that noise, you need school leaders who are really almost obsessively focused and keep everyone involved on track and keep reminding them. So they have to have enough vision to get everyone to buy into that focus, whether it's rigor or differentiation of instruction or equity or whatever it is. Having that focus be really clear and having everyone get behind that focus and keeping them behind when they want to go off and do something else, which happens about once every hour in American school. Sometimes I think we should literally take our mindset and practices and traditions around athletics and just apply it to academics. Because we totally understand in athletics that it's really important to be honest with kids and to give them helpful feedback and to coach them to get better, and to really indoctrinate them in the idea that the harder they work, the stronger they'll get. The exact same thing is true in math, right? You cannot get better without struggle and failure. You cannot learn without that. And so changing the way we think about that is so important. And it's not just teachers. I mean, it's parents, it's everybody. You know, Poland is a great example of a country that, you know, was really performing below average for the developed world in just 10 years ago, and now is up above average at the level of Finland and Canada, despite having a 16% child poverty rate, which is approaching that of our own. You know, much more complicated country than a place like Finland. So this is encouraging, and we know that the things that they have done have also happened in other countries, and they've also seen improvement. The #1 thing that Poland done to get to where it is that they delayed tracking. So instead of separating kids into gifted and talented or honors or AP, they really kept all kids together at the gifted and talented honors level. And it was controversial. It remains controversial. It's harder to do for teachers, and it is something that requires some real political will. But in every country that has done this, that has kept kids together in a rigorous academic environment until at least age 16, sees improvement for all kids, for the kids who were on the academic track and the kids on the vocational track. I used to think that we didn't track in the US, and I was very proud of us for this. And it turns out that we just don't necessarily call it tracking, you know? So we do gifted and talented and then honors, which lead to AP classes. And before you know it, you're on a totally different track than the kid you sat next to in kindergarten. We also tracked in a de facto way, with zip codes, segregated schools, schools based on income. That kind of thing is essentially tracking, because you could easily end up in a high school that only has 1 AP class or 2 AP classes, whereas, you know, a kid, you know, a mile away is at a school with 15 AP classes. So that's a form of tracking too. And what we know is that that kind of thing seems to have a really surprising effect on everyone's expectations. So it's more corrosive to expectations than maybe we realize. I think focusing on education colleges is probably the most elegant, efficient way to elevate the teaching profession. So making education colleges more selective and much more rigorous and requiring much more hands-on student teaching is something that every country that's tried that has seen real benefits, not only in the capacity of their teaching force to teach higher order skills, but also in the respect and trust that the public has. So you can't just demand trust, especially in America. You have to do something. You have to change something. And so I think that would be something that could pay returns for many, many, many years to come and makes a lot of sense. We are educating twice as many teachers as we need in 1,400 schools of education of wildly varying quality. So that really doesn't make sense now that we're asking so much of teachers. It doesn't make sense to under-prepare them for the very real intellectual challenge that is ahead of them. Another thing that I would recommend is delaying tracking, is trying to, instead of having 3 tracks, have 1. And have it be the highest track. And that is, that assumes, again, a higher level of teacher training and support. So it's good to do both because, that's another thing that we really struggle with here is to have enough time for teachers to watch each other teach, to plan, to debrief, to do the really cool cerebral work that is required of great teachers. So we need to carve out more time for teachers to really hone their craft their whole careers, and not just in the beginning, but the whole time. So if you're doing both of those, then you could see great things. If you just do one and not the other, you might not see the impact. It's hard to find a really high-performing education system that doesn't have something like the Common Core standards. Now, we could argue about who creates them, how they're created, what exactly they are, but all over the world, that's a pretty common thing simply because it injects some level of rigor and coherence and consistency into the system, which, with all the noise we have in our education system, rigor and coherence and consistency are incredibly important. Like, we are really starved for those 3 things. So I see it as a positive step. It's not enough. It depends on how it's executed and how teachers are trained in it. I think we could have done a better job telling the story and rolling it out. But I do think that overall, in some ways Texas has strong standards, in some ways other states have strong standards, but having some consistency so that when kids move from district to district, state to state, when teachers are trained in one state and work in another, that there's some level of clear, coherent targets. Even though there's lots of freedom for how you get there and for the curriculum, having those shared goals is kind of a no-brainer when it comes to what works around the world. We are clearly headed for a place where kids will have to audition for their jobs in very real ways. You cannot hide behind a certain college degree or another the way you could in the past. Kids will have to reinvent themselves as adults over and over. They will have to find new ways to be valuable in an economy that values them less every day unless they have really higher order skills. So the earlier you make them comfortable with that challenge, make them actually feel okay with cognitive struggle, the stronger they will be.